morning and welcome to our latest webinar. It's good. I hope you've all got beautiful weather like I have today. I'm Katharine Metters. I'm going to be anchoring today's webinar, and I've got Graham Ashton, a colleague of mine, who will be delivering the webinar today. Before we start, just to remind you, like all of our Posturite webinars, we will be recording this and be putting it on our website. So please, if you have any technical difficulties, be reassured that it will be there for you and your colleagues to view in future. If you have any questions for Graham or anything that is stimulated by the presentation today, please could you put them in the questions box in the panel, and I will be asking Graham as many questions as I can get through at the end. So really, I just want to introduce Graham to you. Graham is one of our senior DSE advisors, and in fact, some of you may already have spoken or communicated with Graham as you've had questions, always on hand with some helpful information, which is really why we decided this was a good idea to put this particular webinar on and tap into his information. Graham's been with us now for over 8 years, so he has plenty of resources and experience to pull on. And with most of us home working over the last year, he's got lots of tips and equipment advice for us. So really, I suppose without further ado, Graham, can you tell us what you can about our home working tips and any equipment that you think might be useful for us? Over to you, Graham.
Fantastic. Thanks, Katharine. Good morning, everybody. So today's webinar is really kind of orientated around just trying to help look at some of the key points that we're coming across with home working. So we're looking to go through the importance of the home workstation environment for your employees and colleagues. Just trying to sort of highlight some of the key issues that we're seeing that are arising with home working, and just sort of trying to highlight the most popular solutions that we have in place. So I just thought I'd set the scene to begin with. So I just thought it'd be worth having a look at what hopefully would be a suitable home workstation. So the picture on the left-hand side is actually my home workstation. So as you'll see, I'm quite fortunate. I've managed to convert a small bedroom into a nice little home office. You'll see I've got a nice good sized desk to work from, comfortable office chair. I've got my 2 external monitors raised up with monitor arms. You will probably have a little look and see that the 2 monitors are quite high. That is because I'm 6'2", so I'm quite a tall person, so I do need my screens quite high. And as much as I've got my laptop open there, it is closed down whilst I'm working, so I'm just using my 2 external screens. And I'm fortunate enough as well to have that sit-stand desk, so I can quite frequently alternate between the seated and the standing position. So from a home working perspective, I'm probably one of the lucky ones that's quite fortunate enough to have a nice home working setup. So we'll first of all take a little bit of a look at what people are currently working from. So with home working, the key concept that I'm finding is to take into account that every user will have a different environment, which will of course lead to a whole range of issues. So we've got those users that are fortunate enough, like myself, to already have or have created their own home office setup, compared to those that this time sort of last year began with just the laptop. So the approach in terms of DSE and ergonomics is to consider every item that they're using for its suitability and also its position and location, because even the right equipment might not be positioned appropriately for them to work from. So from a desking point of view, we are seeing quite a few people working from dining room tables as probably a really obvious location in the home for people to sort of set up a workstation. So however, this location isn't always ideal depending on the actual table itself. So most dining room tables are a similar height to a desk. Some will vary in height, so some can be as high as 78 centimeters, others can be as low as 70. So the height of the table itself is important to consider. This picture here is my dining room table at home. So my desk itself is 75 centimeters in height, and what you'll see is, I've highlighted here, is we've got 63 centimeters for the edge of it. So it's quite a thick desk itself. So it just means that we've really got to take into account the actual dimensions of a desk, not just for its height, but also for its clearance. because it can just obviously have an impact in terms of the legs. Other key considerations when people are working from dining room tables is the location of that. So is the lighting in the room appropriate, depending on which side of the table they might be sat on? The amount of lighting or glare might vary. Also taking into account power sockets, so how are they going to connect any equipment? You know, is there going to be wires coming across that might leave a potential trip hazard? So it's just worth taking into account. If someone says, yes, I've got a dining room table that I work from comfortably, is it suitable? It's always worth picking up on those points. People can sometimes work from kitchen islands. So for some users, a dining room table might be taken by another family member, or they might live in a smaller flat, for example, and they might have a kitchen island instead. So a kitchen island can present a different type of issue, obviously being much higher in height. And whilst they generally do have an edge similar to a desk, it's the seating requirement that tends to be the main kind of issue that we see with these setups. So working at a counter surface generally requires a chair that has a higher gas stem or a draftsman upgrade to sit correctly at the right height. So it can be quite costly if they're looking at working in this way to find a chair of that specification with those options available. Also, it's worth bearing in mind that the chair is going to be much larger in size, so the user is going to have to take into account being able to store that whilst it's not in use within their home. So it might make the user a little bit more resistant to you wanting to implement any changes to help assist them or give them the correct support whilst working. As you can see from mine in the image, I do have a height adjustable bar stool, but I would have absolutely no back support at all while seated. So if I was going to be working from that location or looking at that setup, I wouldn't be able to work from that sort of setup because of the bar stool itself giving me no back support. The other issue with kitchen islands as well is that sometimes you'll find that they've got limited leg space due to their design. So this is actually another issue that I would accommodate and find sitting in this position. So you'll see underneath there's not much leg room for me to be able to sort of sit from comfortably. So again, as I'm quite tall at 6'2", my knees would be hitting that surface and getting in the way, meaning that I'd have to sit a little bit further back and I'd spend all day kind of stretching and reaching. Thankfully, it's not anywhere I've ever had to work from, but it is for some users where they've had to sort of try and adapt and find an area to work from. The other environment that we see quite commonly for users is a dressing table. So dressing tables typically are a suitable height and a good work surface to work from for most users because they are designed for sitting. But we often see the issue with dressing tables as that they'll restrict the leg room with the drawers in a similar way to the dining room table edging did. And this might mean that they're just not able to sit at the right height and sit comfortably. We also tend to find that with dressing tables, sometimes the depth can be an issue. So they're not able to position their screen far enough back at an arm's length away. So long term, this can cause aches from a poor sitting position. It can also potentially lead to eye issues due to the screen positioning. It's also worth noting, taking a look in the image that I've got here, that there's restricted leg room. So because they've got other items in their home, it's restricting on their ability to sit in the right way. Simply highlighting an issue like this to a user can just really encourage them to help resolve it quickly and make an instant impact and a real quick improvement to their workstation. It is worth just sort of touching on the BSEN, so that's the British standard and European standards for desking. So they actually recommend that a fixed height desk should be 740 millimeters with a tolerance of 20 millimeters, so between 72 and 76 centimeters, and that the desktops should not be thicker than 55 millimeters at the front. So it's just worth bearing that in mind when people are looking at using dining room tables, kitchen islands, as to whether or not that would be a suitable environment for them to work from long term, because a lot of people with this new kind of hybrid way of working that a lot of companies are going towards just need to sort of look at how they're going to work long term to help keep them healthy and in the right way. So what can we do? So location, can we discuss with users where they're actually going to set up a suitable workstation? So if they're highlighting issues, can we just have a chat with people about, for their long-term working plan, have they got a space that they're able to set up a permanent setup going forward, whether that be in a spare bedroom, a corner of a larger room like their dining room, or a larger bedroom? Are they able to find a better location to work from if the location is providing an issue? So factors to consider when we're looking at the right kind of locations. Lighting is obviously a really important one. So hopefully for most users, lighting can be ticked off quite easily with natural light coming from windows or patio doors. Supplement it with some interior lighting if needed. So in instances where the lighting might not be sufficient, you can have natural daylight desk lamps to help make the most out of a user's space. So it's also worth just having a look with the users to address any issues that they might also get in their setup with glare or reflections at certain times of day, depending on when the sun comes in. So those kind of issues can sometimes cause MSK issues or eye problems. So just fine tuning the position of the desk itself and facing it in the right way can just make a workstation that much more comfortable. I mean, that alongside the use of blinds and curtains for certain times of year or day can just help make sure it's much better. So it's just worth accounting with a user whether or not their lighting is sufficient and whether or not we can change their setup slightly just to make it a little bit better. Noise, another factor to consider. So it can sometimes affect productivity. Locating a workstation in communal areas can sometimes give you a bit of an unwelcome distraction, taking into account how other people in the home might be using the space. So whether or not they are living alone or other people are out to work, just, what noise are they going to be encountering whilst they're working? So can they position a workstation in a more suitable location? So, away from televisions, children play areas, for example, where are they actually going to locate themselves? Is it going to be somewhere they can concentrate from? Space is obviously also really important. So when helping a user choose the best location, I find it's really vital for them to actually measure the space that they're looking at. So if they are looking at moving to a different room or a different area, it's worth them measuring and taking into account the space they've got so that any solutions that they're looking at implementing are actually going to be successful. So it means not just taking into account the size of a desk they're looking to put in, but also taking into account the space that they're going to be sat in with the chair itself. Is there going to be enough space for them to wheel in and out comfortably and work from? So it's just important for them to take into account the space that they've got there. So solutions, we've obviously at Posturite, we've got a whole range of solutions in place. And I just thought it'd be worth touching on some of the key products and the key ones that are out there that are providing particularly popular. So it has been obviously over a year now for most people since they began working from home, and whilst the short-term temporary solutions have been around and have been working for them, we are starting to see an increase in the amount of issues that users are raising with MSK problems and the impact that they're having. And obviously with the hybrid working becoming one of the main options potentially going forward, it's important that they create themselves that suitable setup. So this is our new and improved Positive Home Worker desk. So it's a really good option. So delivered fully built but flat packed enables it to be nice and easy for delivery to an end user. It also takes away that worry about a user actually having to carry out a desk build themselves. So that health and safety concern and that risk assessment is taken away, which is great. The compact size is sufficient, so it provides them with a suitable working space to work from. But at the same point, for the majority of home workers, it's not too big that it can still fit within sort of a slightly restricted space in the home itself. The key thing I really like about this product and wanted to kind of highlight was the really clever design in terms of being able to fold the legs away. And it just really enables a user to reclaim their home environment over an evening, weekend, or annual leave. So it should just help encourage some users that might be quite resistant to having a full permanent workstation in their home, the ability to sort of say, well, if they've got a desk with fold away legs, when it is the evening or it's a weekend and they need that space back, they are able to fold the desk away and store it a lot easier. So it's been a really popular solution that we've got in place, and we're getting really good sort of feedback on this range. So I thought it was just worth highlighting that it doesn't always need to be a permanent desk. And whilst, yes, if they've got space for it, great, there are slightly more compact solutions out there that work great for users. Hopefully you'll already be aware of the Opoff Sitdown platform, but if not, it's definitely worth considering because it's quite an innovative design. So most Sitdown platforms are designed to predominantly be a permanent solution placed on the desk, and whilst that can be fine in the office, when we're considering a home workstation, it can sometimes be problematic. So you might have come across this. But typically products such as the VariDesk range, Posturite's Deskrite 100, Ergotron, they're rather heavy. So those units typically can weigh between sort of 20 and 25 kilograms, which is quite a considerable load. And it does mean that you do have to really consider the health and safety element of this actually being placed onto a work surface to begin with, as we generally recommend 2 people for this. So if you've got a user with an MSK issue, is it really suitable to be looking at them to lift such a heavy platform onto a desk to create that sit-stand workstation? The Opoff is great in that it's half the weight, so it's much lighter, which makes it much more portable in terms of solution. So it does allow it also to be used in a temporary workspace. So it actually combines quite well with that fold-out desk that we've just been looking at. As you can see in the images, it folds flat to work from whilst they're seated, and it can easily be raised up. So we've got it's obviously got a range of height adjustments to go from sort of 30 to 42, 420 millimeters to suit a different range of height users. And being compact in design is great for the home environment because, again, if they want to kind of flat pack the desk and store it over a weekend or over a week of annual leave, it gives them that flexibility. It's also worth sort of bearing in mind that the Opoff has also got monitor arms that can attach to it as well. So for that more permanent solution to make it more sturdy, there is that option to upgrade it, but it's a great solution just in terms of having that sit stand working in a place where space is really at a premium. However, it is worth just bearing in mind a sit stand platform isn't for everybody. Depending on the amount of equipment that somebody might work from, if they've got multiple screens, they use paperwork, keyboards, a whole host of equipment, they might not be suitable to place onto a platform. Because if you think about the space of the platform itself and storing all that equipment, it might not be big enough for them to work from, which leads nicely into our Jojo homeworker sit-stand desk. So unfortunately, in ergonomics and DSC, we're always going to come across users that have got quite complex MSK issues, or they require something more specialist to be able to help them work comfortably and sort of manage their pain levels. And where they might not be suitable to kind of fit their equipment on a platform, this offers a great solution. So I feel it is important that if users have been provided with a specialist solution in the office to enable them to work from, that we should be ideally looking to try and replicate that in the home workstation if we're asking them to work from there, to give them that same benefit. So with this Jojo, we've really taken into account the home work environment with it to make sure, sort of in terms of the design and the cost, that it works. So as an entry level sit-stand desk, it's a great competitive pricing and a compact size to really fit that home location. So it comes in that fixed dimensions. The specification of the desk is also really good in terms of its height range, which means it can work excellent across a whole wide range of users. So sometimes I will get asked, how do we know if a height range will be suitable for a user on a sit-stand desk? How do we know that's going to be a good solution to put in place? So with this particular desk, it raises from 64.5 centimeters up to 129.5 centimeters. So to give you a good idea, obviously I'm 6'2". When I stand up, we should be looking to take a measurement from the floor to the tip of their elbow when they're standing to know the height of the desk they would need to work from while standing. For me, my measurement was 115 centimeters, so I'm still well within the height range of this desk at 6'2". So it does mean it's really good adjustment capability for users. So as we kind of just covered some desking options, I thought it'd just be worthwhile discussing some key tips for actually setting up the desk itself. Personally, I found one of the most important concepts to discuss with users is the use of zones on their desk. And this just requires a user to consider the items that they have on the desk and how often they actually use them. So the primary working zone at the front of the desk is where we should typically see keyboard, mouse for most users, depending on the role, maybe a small notepad, they might have a headset present, but it's just important to sort of bear in mind where their equipment is. It stops users from kind of overreaching whilst they're at the desk or perching forwards and adopting that poor posture or that poor position. Just making sure those pieces of equipment they use frequently are nice and close to their seated position, and then taking into account their secondary working zone in terms of items they might use infrequently throughout the day. So whether that be a phone handset, for example, it's just bear in mind where they locate equipment to make it comfortable for them to work from. And then we've obviously got the non-working zone, which is still quite important. So it's quite nice sometimes for people to kind of personalize their setup. So they might have a photo or a plant on the desk just to try and sort of freshen up their setup, as that's where they're going to be working from. Try and just create a bit of a more work-friendly environment. So it's important to consider that place still, but just really sort of that primary working zone is the core element to just bear in mind. I do find that when speaking to users or they provide images of the setups, desks can often be a dumping ground in the home for all sorts of items. I think as a surface that, you know, over a weekend they might not be using, it's quite easy for people to just place items onto the desk itself. So just, you know, helping to advise users in terms of where they're putting equipment and not impacting on their workstation is really important. And just sort of, you know, mentioning to colleagues that having a clear desk approach when they're based from home is going to be beneficial to them, so they're not crushing themselves in, they're making the most of the space they've got on that workstation. So having a home workstation is great for a lot of users, but it does present its own risks in terms of users' health. So just highlighting some key issues of inactivity can really help people sort of bear in mind, you know, what they're doing to support themselves throughout the day. So no matter how supportive a workstation setup is and how good the equipment they've got in place is positioned, spending prolonged periods without moving is not recommended. So with us all now kind of, you know, with a lot of people being based from home for long hours, it's important to kind of have a look at how they work. So previously, where they might have had that commute, where they've got that level of activity to walk to a train station, the bus, or walking into the office taken away, it's as important as ever for them to look at adjusting their position frequently. So as you'll see sort of on the screen, there's a number of kind of points of inactivity that people will kind of fall into. You know, what kind of things can they do to combat that and sort of look at trying to sort of take away those negative impacts? You know, can they start their day with a walk or exercise to replace that time they might have been commuting? You know, were they spending an hour on the train into central London, for example, each day? Could they swap that and spend half an hour, 45 minutes going for a walk before they start? You know, can they set a daily target for steps using their smartphone or their smartwatch? Can they set alarms on their phone each hour on the computer just to prompt them to get up or to stretch? I think one of the key things I've found from users is also how people schedule video meetings. So can they schedule their meetings with small gaps in between? Because I'm pretty sure most of us probably fell into the trap of back-to-back video meetings at some point where before you knew it, they were stuck at the desk for 2-3 hours without any chance to get up. So can they kind of schedule their day to allow for those breaks? Because when you're in the office, it's much easier. You know, you might have to walk a little bit to go and sit into a meeting room, walk to go and grab a drink. There's a lot more activity naturally in that area, whilst at home, we don't have that quite so often. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. I thought it was worth highlighting because we want the user to try and help themselves as well as obviously implementing suitable solutions. So if we move on to seating next, I think anyone that's ever been involved in DSC will know chairs tend to be the biggest factor at the workstation, and the difference between having a supportive chair and non-supportive chair can be huge for a number of users. So with users being based at home, it's crucial to identify exactly what they're sitting from, because in the office where a specific model of chair is standard, at home, that's simply not the case. There's going to be a whole range of chairs and seats that people will be sitting on. So it's really important to actually pin down and highlight what have they got. So people could be working from the dining room chair. So if I bring up this image again, you'll see this dining room chair here. It's got obviously a fixed height chair, so we've not got the height adjustment. Generally with dining room chairs, the backrest tends to be slightly reclined, which is pretty standard for that sort of design. Fortunate enough, if I was going to have to use this dining room chair, there is a bit of padding on the seat. Some people will be sitting on a completely wooden dining room chair. So obviously the firmness of the seat can cause issues. It's also worth having a look, obviously, with dining room chairs as well. They do tend to be too low in height for users, and that just stops them from being able to sit, having their forearms level with the desk. It also stops them from sitting with their hips above the knees. So it just creates a really poor posture when they're working from those kind of setups. So it's really important if they're working from a dining room chair to really highlight that as a concern. Bar stools. So again, whilst that bar stool does offer a height adjustment so that you can sit at the right height, obviously with this one, I've got no back support, which is going to be a real issue. But even models that might have a bit of a back edge to be able to support the back a little bit, they tend to only really support the back of the pelvis. So the majority of the back is still going to be unsupported. The other issue with the bar stools as well is that contact underfoot as well. So even though it's got that bit of a foot ring to it, it's not going to be the most comfortable position for their feet to be in. And obviously with the restricted leg space, again, it's a bit of an issue that can cause MSK issues long term. And office chairs. So some people will have fold-out chairs like in the image. Other people will already have an office chair and be working from that. So at first glance, an office chair might be actually quite a relief, knowing that your staff or your employee has got an office chair. However, sometimes just knowing what adjustments and support that chair can offer is really important to identify whether or not it's suitable. But it's also worth just taking into account the state of repair of that chair. So simply just checking with the user whether or not their chair is fully working or not is really important. So a common issue we see with office chairs when they're coming towards the end of their life is that they're not able to maintain their height, and as they sit on the chair, they'll gradually lower over time. So it's really important just to sort of check some of those key things with users. Yes, they might have an office chair. Is it still fully working order? Is it in the correct position and comfortable for them? Because sometimes the adjustments of the chair can be very, very good, but the end user might not know it. So it's just really important to have a look at what office chair they have got and whether or not it's meeting that purpose. We do tend to see a lot of users with what might be kind of quite a classic high street fake leather office chair, which is fixed in its angle and position. So again, it's sometimes worth just getting the user to sort of try and send a photo across to you of them sat in the chair itself. Because if they're a rather short user, they might find that the seat is too big and they spend all day perched on the edge of that office chair. So again, it's just making sure the suitability of the chair works for them, and just taking that into account. It also, if you get an image from the user, it might just be a simple setup. Can we help improve their setup quite quickly by teaching them or explaining to them how they need to adjust that chair? Because again, it might not be the first thing that they've thought of, but it can really help people be comfortable at home, just making a couple of minutes to get into the right position. So one of the biggest improvements to a workstation is obviously seating. We feel like we found a really great option for those that need a comfortable but still a very supportive chair. And the Homeworker Plus has continued to be extremely popular due to its manufacturing quality and also its level of adjustability. So we have seen a huge rise in users that have been using a worn office chair they might have already had, or they purchased a much cheaper chair online at the start of the pandemic to provide them with some seating short term. And this chair just provides a really good replacement with a 5-year guarantee. So it gives them that worthwhile investment that is going to last a good duration for them, but not just having kind of the basic adjustments. It also includes the inflatable lumbar support, a seat angle adjustment, a backrest angle adjustment, just to make it more suitable for those users that might have started to present with some back issues or some MSK issues from sitting on unsuitable seating over the last year. What's really good about this option is that we have it stocked ready to go, so it's on a 5 working day lead time, so it's a nice quick solution to get in place for users. And we've extended the range to account for a small seat and a medium backrest size option, so that those users that are shorter can also be taken into account for. Alongside providing seating for users, again, another issue that we are coming across quite frequently is the uniqueness that is a home working environment. So they've got a different workspace, and the flooring type is also really important to bear in mind. So office chairs will typically always come with a carpet caster, so that's the wheels as a standard, which for most offices is absolutely fine. But at home, this can cause issues. So where people have got hard floors, such as wooden floorboards, laminate, vinyl flooring, those sort of chair casters can cause problems, and it can sometimes create an extra hurdle for you to address with a user in terms of supplying a suitable chair for them. So whilst hard floor casters are recommended to help the chair move correctly and try and avoid scuffing the floor, in areas where the user might be sort of explaining that a floor is quite expensive, or they're really concerned about it damaging their property, a chair mat can just take that risk completely away. So they can place the chair onto it and it protects their flooring. So I just thought it was just worth mentioning that solution for those users that highlight that. We do understand that in some cases, it's not always actually required or possible to replace or provide an ergonomic chair. So in these circumstances, it's just worth highlighting that sometimes a support can do exactly what's needed. So I just wanted to kind of quickly go over some of the best supports that we've kind of got in place and how they can be used to help users. So the first one is the inflatable lumbar support. So it's probably one of the best available on the market due to its versatility. I really like it from a DSE point of view. With a nice soft material to actually contact the lower back, it's comfortable to rest against the user's back. With a nice elasticated strap, it can attach around any backrest, so it can be used in the car, it can be used around an office chair, it can be used pretty much around most seating without any issues. And then they can simply inflate and deflate it to adjust the level of support that they feel they need to match the natural curvature of their spine. So it's a really good product just in terms of the adjustability and finding that right level of support for a user. And if they've got an office chair and they just feel like they need a little bit more back support, it's a great thing just to put in place as a quick fix that will just do the job for them. The 11-degree wedge is also another one that is, again, very popular and very good just as a good solution. So with this product, it's got a nice padded design, so it's nice and comfortable to sit on, but it's got a good level of foam to be able to maintain its shape. So it's great just for kind of improving their seated position. So if they need to try and raise their height slightly, or they're looking at changing the hip positioning, it's a great product just to put in place that can just make that office chair that little bit more comfortable, or just sort of give them that much better seated position. The next one is the active comfy cushion. So you might not have seen this one before, as it's a relatively new product to our range, but it's one that we have provided for quite a while. And it's really good in just offering some extra cushioning, because what we find is sometimes people might say that the chair they've got is absolutely fine in terms of its adjustments, but it's just too firm, or it's lost its padding over time. And just having a seat pad that you can put onto a seat with some softer padding. So this has actually got a layer of memory foam inside it to make it comfortable. And then what it can do, it can also just raise their height slightly. It's just a real quick solution that can be put in place to make an unsuitable chair suitable. So really good solutions out there on the market just to sort of try and tweak an existing chair to make it just right for a user if they are getting some minor issues. So looking at how users sit at home compared to the office is quite a key consideration, and something that we get asked frequently about is what is the difference between the two. Yeah, it's one of the main things I get asked is what's the difference. And in theory, there shouldn't really be a difference, as we should all be looking to sit in the correct posture and have appropriate support whilst working, regardless of whether we're at home or in the office. So that being said, typically with most users, we are having to kind of set them up from new when they're working from home. And this means just going back to those core DSE pointers to get somebody set up correctly. And this should be our real go-to for users. So as you'll see on screen, I've attached our DSE helpful hints advice sheet, which is available on the website for you to use. But one of the key things really is just in terms of sitting is the first thing we look at to set up users, their sitting height. You know, it should be that they're sat there with their shoulders and arms nice and relaxed, and the tip of their elbow and forearm is level with the desk. And it's just really important, so you know, even these fine tweaks in terms of their positioning, just to get them right, because even a centimetre too high or too low will affect the way that they work. So if they're being sat too low, which is common for users at home, I mean, they'll naturally end up just shrugging their shoulders slightly whilst they're typing and using the mouse, and that can then just lead them to carrying tension in their upper back and the shoulders and around the neck. So just slight tweaks and changes to their setup can make huge changes in terms of the actual sort of comfortableness of their setup. And once they're at the right height, it's worth just checking, can they get their hips above the height of their knees? Have they got solid contact underfoot? It's just really trying to highlight what issues they might have and whether or not it is just a case of positioning their equipment in the right manner, because they will have just started from scratch when they set that workstation up. A common theme that we have seen is that users are wanting to sit generally much lower in height at home to try and get their feet to touch the floor. So typically, if you think about in the office, we would always be wearing shoes. And if you think about shoes, there's always going to be a thickness to the sole or the heel that people will be wearing. So the key point here is that while some users might say they want to sit lower and they want to have their feet on the floor, we've got to bear in mind their sitting position in relation to the desk. So, you know, we've got to have that contact underfoot. We don't want them to be sat at the right height so their arms are level with the desk and then have it so their feet are dangling off the floor. So where a user might have used a footrest in the office, they're likely to have to need to use one in their home address, which does lead us nicely onto footrests. So whilst it is easy to overlook a footrest for a home workstation, there's still going to be a number of people that will need to use those to be able to sit in the right sitting position. And having contact underfoot is vital for your posture. So it is really important to be able to sit in the right manner. So there's a whole range of footrests available out in the market, all offering slightly different designs and adjustments, but essentially, as long as the user can comfortably place their feet on it, that's all that really matters. And the ultimate foot support from Fellows is probably our go-to cost-effective footrest on the market. It's got 3 different height settings. It's got a rocking motion to it so you can get in a nice comfortable position. And it's just a really good option for people to have a footrest that's not going to cost the world. For users that might need something a little bit lower, we've got our Tri-Right. So a much flatter design, easy to adjust by kicking the triangles to adjust the height whilst they're seated, giving them that support so they can change the height and the angle. But a footrest, again, it's just worth bearing in mind for somebody. If they need something to give them that contact underfoot, they've got it. So pretty much with all staff working from home, they've got a laptop or a tablet that they use to work from. And in isolation, hopefully we'd all be aware that they're not DSE compliant and will create postural issues if they work in that way. So with a laptop placed on the work surface, the screen is always going to be too low in height, and that just encourages users to adopt that kind of slumped posture and look down, which inevitably is going to lead to MSK issues. So this solution is one that we probably have all come across before. It's just a laptop pack or connecting their equipment to be able to separate the screen from the keyboard. And it's really simple, a separate keyboard and a mouse so that they can put these in that primary working region that I mentioned earlier, so that everything's nice and close to them whilst they're working. And what's quite clever about some of these laptop packs that are available now is just that they can be quite compact in design. So again, if you've got a user that's really sort of concerned about space in their home workstation, you know, being able to fold them flat and store them at the end of the day. So for example, the Slim Cool laptop stand on your left-hand side can be folded completely flat, a bit like a book, and can be put into a drawer at the end of each day. I do just want to touch on some frequent considerations that we come across that are important when selecting equipment for a laptop or a tablet. The first one is the connectivity of keyboards and mice, and you will see that we've set up a wired and a wireless packs on the website. But even wireless keyboards and mice will sometimes require a USB receiver to connect their laptop, so it's just worth checking with staff how many USB ports their laptop has and whether or not they need a USB hub to be able to connect equipment from suitably. We do find that some devices might only have 1 or 2 USB slots, and depending on how much they're trying to connect, it might cause issues. So it's just worth bearing that in mind in terms of finding a suitable solution. The other consideration that I kind of just wanted to flag up that we are seeing is where people are using devices like a Microsoft Surface Pro, for example, which is a kind of a hybrid between a tablet and a laptop. So where the screen can detach from the keyboard, the screen's actually held up by a flap that comes out of the rear of the tablet itself, and obviously that means it won't work with a standard laptop stand. So we do have products which are designed as laptop and tablet stands, like the Vision, which is now on your left-hand side, just to be able to hold the screen at the right height. So it is just worth checking again, if you are looking at implementing any solutions, is there equipment that they work from that IT provided work suitable to go with a certain product. So having touched on laptop packs for improving the setup for a home workstation, I just think it's really great to talk about screen positioning, and I really like this graphic we've created because I think it's really good for people to kind of use and look at in terms of how to improve their setup. So when we are implementing changes and supplying new equipment, it's really important to make sure that users are going to get the most out of it. And it might seem like common knowledge to us, and we might look at it and think, yeah, that's really basic, they might know that. But for an end user, they might not be fully aware, or they might kind of just think, yeah, that's close enough. So we've got 6 key signs that somebody's position might not be quite right, and kind of flags to look out for. Whether it be sort of, they're leaning on their desk, squinting their eyes, it's just real key points that might identify that someone's screen position, or that the laptop screen just needs adjusting to be able to make them sit in the nice upright supported posture. And I just thought it was really key to have a look at that. How can they get that right position, and making sure that that screen is roughly about an arm's length away from their screen, so they're not having to kind of lean forwards and it's not kind of affecting their eyes. Making sure that the height of the screen is the right level, so they're naturally sat nice and upright, and just making sure, obviously, those kind of glare issues as well. Have they got the screen position in a suitable way that it's central and it's not being affected by glare that's going to affect the way that they sit. I think we can all relate to having adapted to different ways of working since March 2020, when we first entered lockdown and offices were suddenly closed. And I think most of us had the challenge of trying to set up a new workstation, and also in the way that work has also changed. So working from home has meant that we're much more isolated, or we've been much more isolated from our colleagues. And where in the office you could easily speak to members of your team that were sat next to you for a quick query, it was much more difficult. So also from meetings point of view, it's had a huge impact. Walking across the office to a meeting room, which could be on another floor or even in another building on a site, is simply now you're sat at the desk. So we've had that kind of what I'd probably describe as a monumental increase in video calling through a range of platforms, so Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, there's a whole host of them. And I think it's just really accelerated, because I think we were naturally going towards that way of working already, and it's just kind of sped that process up. And it's just really important that we kind of take into account the way that people are now working, that it's as important as ever for people to kind of look at the way that they work now. So with so many people being based at home, they might previously have been quite, out on the road and worked in a different way. So the flexibility of working from home has been really beneficial for a lot of people. And with some people, where they would have previously been going into face-to-face meetings and traveling and commuting to see people, now able to do that remotely, it obviously has had a huge shift in the way that people are able to work from, which hopefully, has been a huge benefit in terms of productivity and getting the most out of people's working days. So, now it just changes the way that people have worked, and that hybrid working with people returning to the office, I think it's just worth bearing in mind that kind of shift back to kind of office life and the way that we're working for that way. So with working obviously off Teams calls and Google Meets, for example, it does mean we're on a lot more video calls, and we've launched a new range of headsets from Jabra, which are designed predominantly for this kind of accelerated shift in the use of technology to allow people to communicate via video calls comfortably. Having the capability for users to connect to their laptop with a headset is a really vital piece of equipment now. I think everybody hopefully has already got a headset so that they can work from comfortably. And with hybrid working likely to be implemented for a lot of people as the year goes on, headsets can be quite technical with their specifications in terms of making sure that people have got a good headset. So we've sourced what we believe is quite a high quality headset, but at a good cost. So with an easy connection via a USB, so it can just be plugged straight into their laptop. They've been designed to be comfortable for a prolonged use, so nice cushioned ear pads, comfortable with a control on the wire, so they can adjust volume control quite easily whilst they're on calls. And crucially, having a noise cancelling element as well. So when they're around home, if they're sitting in an area where there's background noise from pets, doorbells, family members, I mean, the list goes on, having a headset with a noise cancelling element just blocks out that background noise so that when you're speaking to your colleagues, they're able to hear you clearly. So it's really important, headsets are becoming more and more prominent from a workstation setup point of view. So they're worth just bearing in mind. I also think it's just worth mentioning that users that are using speakers and the microphone off their laptop whilst they're at home, when they do return back to the office, it might not be appropriate. So with the amount of noise that they might have in an office, or also depend on the actual nature of the meeting with confidentiality, they might need a headset when they're going back in the office if they are still conducting video calls with people that aren't necessarily in the office on the same day. So it's just worth bearing little things like that in mind when people are returning back to the office. It's just worth acknowledging how life has changed over the past year for many of us. So just reiterating the importance of breaking away from the workstation for users. And of course, in an ideal scenario, we'll all be frequently adjusting, and changing our position regularly, getting up and away from the desk, changing between seated and standing positions. But it's really important to kind of look at how life has changed for a lot of people, and I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the stats that are out there at the moment. So in 2019, where 69.3% were using the screen for 6 hours a day, you can see how that's substantially increased to 87.3%. So we've got a lot more users now working on screens, but we've also had a significant increase with how long people are actually working from their screen for, and that inevitably might lead to an increase in aches and pains developing for users. So it is really important to try and sort of get ahead of the game in terms of making sure people are sitting in the right way, to go from sort of 9.8 hours on average to 11.3, whether that be people using that commute time to work from for longer, it has had an impact. So what can a user do if they are potentially working longer based at the screen? So we just mentioned headsets. Can they potentially opt for a wireless headset to take a call? So whilst they're on that call, could they walk around the home, to provide a bit of a working break, so that they're still working and on the call, but they're able to kind of stretch and move and walk across the home? I have to say it's something that I do all the time, is just stand up and move whilst I'm on calls. I will constantly, when I'm on a phone call, be stood up and potentially walking around the upstairs of my home to be able to kind of allow myself to move while still working. Combining that with frequent stretching can just really help prevent the onset of the symptoms from just prolonged inactivity. So finding a routine to kind of change the way that people work is really important, but also having an active lunch on certain days where they go out for a walk can just help break up that working day as well, so that you're as proactive as possible when they are at the workstation, hopefully with the weather improving, it will be a lot more appealing to users to try and sort of implement that change now in the way to sort of help themselves. And that is pretty much all we'd like to cover. So I'll drop back to you, Katharine, if you're able to see if we've had any questions that have come in at all that anybody has got to ask.
There has indeed. Thank you, Graham. In fact, you caught me on the hop then. I was just standing up and having a stretch. You just reminded me. So thank you for that. Yes, we've got a few questions. One quite specific one to begin with.
Yep.
The height of the fold-away desk. Could you remind people? I don't think it was on your slide. Do you know it offhand?
Yes, it's at 72 centimetres.
Okay, that's brilliant. We also had a number of questions, which I think I've answered about the BSEN requirements for the desk. So I've answered that for most people, but if in case they want to know, it says BSEN 527 1:2011. So we'll make sure that's available too if people want to know what the standard is for the desk heights. What other questions have I got here for you? There was a question about fire safety implications for the home worker chairs. Are you happy to answer that, Graham, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to answer that one. So fire regulations are obviously different. For those of you that don't know, there are different fire regulations for the office compared to a home address. So the Home Worker Plus chair has actually got a specifically designed type of material and foam to make it compliant with those fire regulations. So we've actually updated most of our ergonomic chair range to be in accordance with those regulations for both the home and office environments, but the Home Worker Plus has met those criteria to be appropriate for that environment.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graham. And there was somebody asking about how much space is required for home working setup. Is there a minimum requirement?
So there's no minimum requirement per se. It depends on the amount of time that somebody is going to be working from that setup, and also the equipment that they need to work from. I think generally we should be looking for them to have a desk with at least a depth of 60 centimeters, so that the screen is able to be far enough back, and there should be comfortable enough room to get in and out of the workstation with the chair. I do get asked quite commonly about the foot bases. Are there any more compact foot bases for chairs? And the simple answer is no. They've got to be a set width to be able to be sturdy. But a foot base generally is around 60 centimeters in terms of its sort of diameter. So generally 60 centimeters for the depth of the desk, and potentially another 60 centimeters for the chair itself to be able to kind of comfortably get in and out, would leave you about 1.2 meters for a suitable spacing to kind of have a desk and a chair fit within that somebody can use comfortably, would be hopefully the answer that they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, obviously the legal requirements for home and, DSC and office are very similar, really. They're the requirements to control the risk, aren't they?
Yes.
I've just been actually advised by our internal people that we've got lots of questions about certain products, and we will be sending out information about all the products that Graham has talked about with the email with the link for tomorrow. So if there's any specific questions, hopefully they'll be answered by the information that's going out. So thank you, Emily, for reminding me of that. So that would be great. Graham, I've got a question here. Can you please explain again how to determine the right height of your desk in standing, please?
Yes. So when we're standing, we want our upper body to be in the same position in relation to the desk. So the best way to determine this is to get the user to stand up, and if they bend their forearms and elbows at 90 degrees, we want to just simply measure from the floor to the underside of their elbow, and that measurement would determine the height that the top of their desk should be at. If they've got a sit-stand desk already or a platform, then they can just stand up, and if they bend their arms and their elbows so they're at 90 degrees, they want the desktop to be level with that forearm, just so that way they're not having to shrug their shoulders up at all or kind of slouched down slightly. It should just be the tip of the elbow as the point for where they're looking to set the desk.
Okay, that's great. I've got a comment here. As we need to allow an arm's length to the screen, is 600mm really deep enough, I presume, for the desk? Do you want to comment on that, Graham, please?
Yeah, so an arm's length is obviously not a standard measurement, so everybody's arms will be slightly different. So it is a guideline. It's not an exact science as to how far away. I would say 60 centimeters is probably the minimum that we should have, and it will depend a bit on the size of the screens themselves and the way that it adjusts, because ideally with that 60 centimeters the screen would be right at the rear of the desk. But it should work for most users, 60 centimeters being more than appropriate for them, because they are going to be sat slightly on the edge of the desk itself and sat nice and upright.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I find 60 is right on the edge, as you say. I think, you know, to have more depth, I think is always beneficial, and it's always important to make sure it's right for the individual, isn't it? And the work that they do and that type of thing. Yes. So let me just see. I'm just looking at. Okay, once again, Harry's asked about what the ideal height of the desk was again, according to the BSEN. Do you just want to just touch on that again, Graham, just to remind people?
So the BSEN rate states that the desk should be 74 centimeters with a plus or minus tolerance of 2 centimeters. So the range should be between 72 and 76 centimeters.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say I was very pleased that you mentioned the actual thickness of the desk too. I think this is my favourite shout at the television moment at the moment. You know, when people are recommending, you know, lovely desks for your, you know, for your home working environment, and they're these big ones with drawers underneath, and I'm thinking with my fat thighs, there's no way I'm going to get under there and actually be close to the desk. So I'm really glad you mentioned that from a very personal point of view. So thank you for that. Can you just tell me, what do you think the most common fault you see is, Graham, when people call you up and discuss their issues? What's the most common thing that you get to deal with?
I think the most common thing I actually get is the seat height that people are sat on. I think that's the most common fault that I come across. That's always quite a quick and easy fix, because as I tried to allude to, even being sat a centimetre or 2 centimetres too low will cause them to sit and work in a completely different way that's going to cause aches and pains. And I think it's one of the key points to really start from is if they can sit at the right height, that generally tends to be the biggest win and quick fix for a lot of users into making the setup much more comfortable. I personally find it's the most common thing that comes through is people either being sat too low in height and just need to raise their seat up slightly higher. It's a real quick fix for people, and it has a great impact. I get the arm moment quite a lot. You know, once you say, oh, well, if you just raise it up and they go, oh, that feels much better straight away. It does really have a huge impact just checking that height with a user.
Okay, that's great. I think it's the last one we've got time for. Do we know what the weight of the fold-away desk is by any chance? I don't know that offhand, but Graham, are you aware of the weight of it?
I haven't got that to hand.
That's fine. We'll make sure it goes out with the information tomorrow. We'll make sure it's within the information of the equipment. I just wondered if you could remember offhand, because I couldn't.
Yeah, I know it's not significantly heavy, but I haven't got an exact figure, so we'll get that information out for that one.
Make sure that's out. Okay, that's great. Well, Graham, I think we're coming up to 12, so I think we need to sort of round this up now. Can I just thank you for sharing your thoughts and your home? Actually, I was quite impressed to see that your light actually mirrors the picture behind your desk too. So we'll have a further conversation about that, I think, later on about that. So thank you, Graham, for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope you'll join us for our next Posturite webinar. So enjoy the sunshine, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care. Goodbye now.